Hello everyone, welcome to Sleepy Crimes Hub. I'm here with you tonight to help you relax and slowly fall asleep. I know many of you are watching this video to rest your mind. So before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time is it right now. Now, get comfortable, close your eyes if you like, take a deep breath, and let go of the day. Let's gently begin with Case 1. Billie Jo Jenkins grew up in East London under difficult circumstances as her father was imprisoned and her mother struggled to cope alone, leading to her placement in foster care at a young age with Shawn and Lois Jenkins, who, by coincidence, shared her surname. The couple had several daughters of their own, and she was brought into a lively household where she gradually became part of the family. The Jenkins family later moved to Hastings on the East Sussex coast, where Billie Jo attended Helenswood School, adapting to a new environment while continuing to dream of becoming an actor, a goal that reflected her fun-loving and creative nature. Despite outward appearances, her life with the Jenkins household was far from easy. Those who knew her, including Shawn Jenkins' own children and Billie Jo's friends, described a pattern of violence and strict discipline that went beyond normal upbringing. Billie Jo confided in school friends about incidents in which she had been physically harmed, recounting times when she was punched or scratched on the neck, and on one occasion came to school with blood on her face, explaining that it happened after she had asked Jenkins to stop slapping her pet dog, and he had pressed her against the door. Friends also observed that she often arrived at school with visible bruises on her arms and legs, which she attributed to conflicts with her foster father, reflecting the emotional and physical stress she endured. At times, her pain and frustration manifested in small but telling ways, such as writing hate on her knuckles or expressing strong feelings of anger toward him. A glimpse into the inner turmoil of a young girl caught between the desire for familial love and the reality of a harsh environment. Shawn Jenkins later admitted to slapping Billie Jo in moments of anger and revealed that he occasionally disciplined the children by striking them with a slipper or a ruler, a reflection of his volatile temper that his wife, Lois, described as vein-popping whenever he lost control. Friends and acquaintances of the family recounted further instances of his aggression, including a holiday in France when he had kicked Billie Jo forcefully in the ankle despite it already being sprained, highlighting the severity of the treatment she endured. Professionally, Jenkins held the position of deputy head teacher at William Parker School in Hastings. Yet it was later discovered that he had falsified his qualifications on his CV to secure the job and had repeated similar deceptions when applying for a headship, raising questions about his integrity and the authenticity of his career achievements. His tendency toward dishonesty was foreshadowed by earlier behavioral problems, as he had been suspended from school during his teenage years. Beyond his professional life, he also engaged in local politics, having stood as a candidate for the Conservative Party, presenting a public persona that sharply contrasted with the abusive behavior reported within his family. On Valentine's Day in 1997, a tense argument erupted between Shawn and Lois Jenkins over Billie Jo, whom Shawn would later describe to authorities as difficult, setting the stage for a tragic turn of events. The following day, after returning home from a trip, Shawn asked Billie Jo to lower the volume of her music, and evidence later suggested that he became intensely enraged when she refused to comply. That afternoon, Billie Jo had been painting the patio doors, but Jenkins criticized her work, pointing out that she had gotten paint on the windows and dismissing her efforts as a mess. In a horrifying escalation, shortly afterward, her lifeless body was discovered in the back garden of the family home in Hastings, East Sussex. She had been struck repeatedly over the head with an iron tent peg while continuing her painting, the weapon having been left out on the patio earlier in the day by one of the other children in the household. The brutal assault claimed her life within minutes, bringing a sudden and devastating end to the young girl's life and leaving a haunting mark on the family and community. After Billie Jo's disappearance, police asked her foster father, Shawn Jenkins, to make a public appeal for her, but suspicion soon fell on him, including from his own wife, and he quickly became the main focus of the investigation, as he had been the last person to see her alive and the first adult to discover her body. On the 24th of February, Jenkins was arrested on suspicion of murder. Initially, he claimed he had not been at the house that afternoon, but he later admitted that he had been present, and formal charges of murder were brought against him on the 14th of March. During questioning, he told police that he had found Billy Joe in a pool of blood on the patio, but the investigation revealed erratic behavior around the time of the crime, along with the discovery of numerous microscopic spots of Billy Joe's blood on his clothing that on the day of the murder, Jenkins had been driving two of his natural daughters home from a clarinet lesson, while Billy Joe stayed behind at the house to paint the patio doors in the rear garden in order to earn extra pocket money. According to police, the assault occurred after he returned home, with his two daughters waiting in the car outside the front of the house. Following the attack, he returned to the car, drove the girls to a nearby DIY store, and strangely took no money with him, further deepening suspicions about his actions that afternoon. Police concluded that Shawn Jenkins had deliberately driven his two daughters around a nearby park in a circular route and taken an unusual path that extended the journey time in order to provide himself with an alibi, despite his claim that he had only gone to buy more white spirit, even though there was already some in his garage. He insisted that when he returned home, he found Billy Joe dead, but investigators found it implausible that a stranger could have broken into the garden, located a weapon, killed her, and left unnoticed, all within the brief period Jenkins was supposedly away. His behavior after discovering her lifeless body raised further suspicion as he went outside to operate the roof on his convertible, a bizarre act the detectives later believed was intended to create an explanation for any blood that might have ended up in the car, given that it had already been spattered with blood from the assault before driving to the DIY store. By doing this, he delayed calling emergency services, only contacting 999 after being prompted by a neighbor, and even then he refused to follow basic instructions, failing to put Billy Joe in the recovery position or check if she was breathing, responding when asked that he did not know because he had not looked. Police later suggested that this behavior indicated he was aware that she was already beyond help, as he had been the one to murder her, casting his actions as calculated attempts to mislead authorities and create an appearance of innocence in the aftermath of a horrific crime. Only minutes after discovering Billy Joe's body, Shawn Jenkins went on to answer the door to a visiting colleague without mentioning that anything was wrong, a behavior that drew suspicion from investigators. His accounts of the events were inconsistent. He initially claimed to police that he had never entered the house after returning from the clarinet lesson, only later admitting that he had, and authorities believed he may have altered his story knowing that his two other daughters could provide differing versions of events. When he called emergency services, he told the operator that he had spent over half an hour at the DIY store, yet evidence later revealed that the trip had lasted barely a fraction of that time, around 10 minutes. Further examination of the crime scene revealed additional troubling details. A piece of plastic bin liner was found in Billy Joe's nose, originating from the plastic material Jenkins had left out on the patio for her painting, and a nearby bucket of water, which the other daughters had been using to clean the car outside, appeared to have been moved to the patio by Jenkins. These small but telling details, combined with his conflicting statements and unusual actions immediately after the murder, painted a picture of behavior calculated to confuse investigators, obscure the timeline of events, and mask his involvement in a horrific crime. During Shawn Jenkins' trial in 1998, the prosecution presented evidence revealing that over 100 bloodstains had been found on his shoes, trousers, and jacket, which they argued were the result of impact spatter from the assault on video. Forensic scientists testified that the pattern of the blood appeared as a fine spray, consistent with what would be expected when a weapon strikes an already bloodied surface, and stated that the distribution and appearance of the stains strongly suggested that Jenkins himself had been the assailant. Two expert witnesses for the prosecution confirmed that the pattern was typical of the fine backspatter that would land on someone committing such an attack, reinforcing the argument that he was directly involved in the assault. The defense called two of their own scientific experts to testify, yet both conceded that the evidence was not inconsistent with the claim that Jenkins had carried out the attack, leaving the bloodstain analysis as a key piece of forensic evidence pointing toward his culpability in the murder. Shawn Jenkins maintained that any blood found on his clothing had been the result of attempts to help Billy Joe. Yet forensic experts refuted this claim, noting that similar bloodstains were absent on both. The paramedics and the neighbor who had tried to assist her with no traces found on their clothing at all. The defense conducted experiments in an effort to demonstrate that the blood could have ended up on him from Billie Joe exhaling as she died, but these claims were widely rejected by medical experts. A pediatrician dismissed the theory as impossible, and a pathologist concluded that her injuries would have been so severe that she could not have generated sufficient breaths to expel blood in this manner, describing the experiments as wholly unrealistic. He explained that she would have had to inhale an extraordinary volume of air, over 2 liters, to exhale with enough force for such a spatter to occur, which he deemed highly improbable. Moreover, if such forced exhalation had been possible, it would have been visible to witnesses that she was still breathing, yet no one reported observing any movement or life. Ultimately, the pathologist concluded that the blood on Jenkins' clothing could not have resulted from Billie Joe's breathing and strongly supported the assertion that the stains were consistent with him having been the assailant. The possibility that the blood on Shawn Jenkins' clothing could have been caused by droplets expelled from Billie Joe breathing was considered so remote by experts that it was entirely discounted. At trial, Jenkins attempted to portray Billie Joe as disobedient and impatient, claiming that she would destroy clothing or hurt herself, such as ripping the heads off dolls, or refuse to follow instructions, suggesting that her temperament could explain incidents in the household. The court also examined Jenkins' long history of deception, particularly regarding the falsification of his CV, noting that he was under considerable stress at the time because his job offer would have been withdrawn had the fabricated qualifications been discovered, with a new position scheduled to start the following September. He had claimed to have obtained 10 O levels, yet in reality he had only achieved 3 grade C passes in art, English, and history, 1D grade in arithmetic, and E grades in French and physics. He further asserted that he held a teaching qualification in English with drama, when in fact it was in physical education, and he misrepresented his higher education by claiming attendance at the University of London instead of the less prestigious University of East London. Despite Jenkins' attempts to deflect blame and explain his behavior, he was convicted of murder on the 2nd of July, 1998, by a unanimous jury decision, even though the judge had informed them that a majority verdict would have sufficed for conviction. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge deeming him a danger to the community. Detective Superintendent Jeremy Payne, who led the investigation, described the murder as a brutal act carried out in a moment of incomprehensible rage and violence. And the police surgeon who certified Billie Joe's death remarked that in his 26 years of service, it was without doubt the saddest and most brutal murder he had ever attended, emphasizing the horrific and senseless nature of the crime. After his conviction for the murder of Billie Joe Jenkins, it was revealed that Shawn Jenkins had also been charged with obtaining a pecuniary advantage by deception, stemming from the falsified qualifications he had presented when applying for his job, though this charge was ordered to remain on file. Following the conviction, Jenkins launched an appeal in 1999, claiming that the blood on his clothing could have resulted from Billie Joe exhaling as she died, but the judge firmly rejected this argument, concluding that even if she had been able to breathe out, the blood could not have spattered to the height observed on his clothing, and the appeal was subsequently dismissed. Despite this, investigative journalist Bob Woffenden argued that the original trial amounted to a miscarriage of justice. Years later, the Criminal Cases Review Commission took up the case, reconsidering evidence from a scientific witness called by the defense whose conclusions had previously been rejected, suggesting that a rare condition could have caused gas buildup in Billie Joe's lungs, potentially forcing her to expel blood involuntarily. In light of this alternative explanation, the CCRC referred the case back to the Court of Appeal in 2004, which found that the jury at the original trial might have reached a different verdict had this evidence been presented, rendering the conviction unsafe. Consequently, the appeal was allowed, a retrial was ordered, and Jenkins was released on bail pending the proceedings, reopening the legal battle surrounding one of the most notorious cases in recent history. At the retrial in 2005, forensic experts suggested that the microscopic blood spray on Shawn Jenkins' clothing could conceivably have come from Billie Joe's injured airway as he moved her. Yet after 39 hours of deliberation, the jury was unable to reach a majority verdict, necessitating a second retrial. During the second retrial, the prosecution emphasized that the jury would need to determine whether the blood had been deposited during the initial attack or afterward when Jenkins discovered her body, while evidence also emerged suggesting the possibility of a flirtatious and sexualized dynamic between Jenkins and his foster daughter, with testimony from his other children indicating that he may have shown a preference for Billy Joe over them. Despite 3 months of evidence, the second retrial likewise failed to produce a majority verdict, and on the 9th of February 2006, at the Old Bailey in London, Jenkins was formally acquitted. The Crown Prosecution Service confirmed that no further retrials would be pursued, making him the first man in British criminal history to be acquitted after 3 trials for the same crime. The entirety of the police investigation, legal proceedings, and appeals was estimated to have cost £10 million, with 700 witness statements collected, 36 days spent by jurors deliberating across the 3 trials, and Jenkins himself giving evidence in the witness box over 11 days, reflecting the extraordinary scale, complexity, and public attention of the case. The acquittal of Shawn Jenkins proved highly controversial, particularly when it emerged that the jury had never heard evidence from his wife, who described him as a violent man prone to anger, claiming that he had beaten the children with a stick and had previously caused her serious injury, including a perforated eardrum, in what she characterized as a violent and volatile marriage. Jenkins publicly denied ever striking his children or his wife, but his own children contradicted him, asserting that he had indeed used corporal punishment against them. Adding to the controversy, the final retrial judge disallowed new forensic evidence that might have implicated Jenkins more directly, which showed that the bloodstains on his clothing contained minute fragments of Billy Joe's bone and flesh, suggesting that the stains had been deposited during the assault itself. Further analysis by scientists from the University of Cambridge revealed that the bloodstains also contained tiny fragments of metal from the iron tent peg used in the attack. The court's reason for excluding this evidence was that it had been submitted too late for the defense to respond, a decision that angered Billy Joe's biological family, who had always maintained Jenkins' guilt and vowed to fight on in the hope of securing his reconviction, believing that crucial scientific evidence had been withheld from the jury and influenced the outcome of the trial. Around the time of Billy Joe's murder, police noted the presence of a mentally ill man who had allegedly been seen in the street near the Jenkins home, and although he was taken into custody, he was considered unable to be properly questioned. Jenkins and his wife Lois claimed that they had been so concerned about prowlers and break-ins in their neighborhood that they had installed security lights and window locks to protect their home. During Jenkins' appeal in 2004, his legal team submitted that this unidentified man could have been responsible for the murder, yet the court firmly rejected the claim, finding no evidence linking him to Billy Joe's death and noting that forensic and identification evidence pointed away from any third-party involvement. The defense had been aware of this alleged suspect during the original trial, but had not pursued it due to tactical considerations, and police confirmed that witnesses placed the man at least 15 minutes away from the house at the critical moment, making it impossible for him to reach the property and commit the crime in the short window between Jenkins' departure and return. Jenkins maintained that Billy Joe had been alive and well before he set off on a 10-minute trip to the DIY store with his 2 other daughters, and that she was found dead immediately upon his return, meaning that any hypothetical third-party perpetrator would have had to break into the garden, locate a weapon, assault Billy Joe, and escape unnoticed all within that brief interval, a scenario police deemed entirely implausible. Following his formal acquittal, Sussex police stated that they had resolutely sought justice for Billy Joe and emphasized that there were no plans to reopen the murder investigation. Although on the 31st of January 2022, the force announced a forensic review of the case, clarifying that the wider investigation would not be reopened. After his release from prison, Shawn Jenkins relocated to Leamington in Hampshire with his new wife, Christina Ferniehoff, and soon after enrolling in a criminology course at the University of Portsmouth, he applied in 2008 for £500,000 in compensation for his imprisonment. This application was rejected, and Jenkins stated that he would not appeal, with the Ministry of Justice citing the absence of conclusive evidence proving his innocence as the reason for denying the claim. In a Channel 5 documentary aired in February 2022, members of the police investigative team commented on Jenkins' continued efforts to misrepresent events in a book he wrote about the murder following his acquittal, in which he claimed he had been forced to sign police statements without reading them. Investigators countered this by asserting that he had meticulously reviewed every written summary of interviews once they were completed and had consistently taken his own detailed notes during the proceedings, highlighting a continued pattern of manipulation and deception even after the conclusion of his legal battles. In memory of Billy Joe Jenkins, a memorial seat crafted from a locally felled oak tree by artist Jock Hare was dedicated in Alexandra Park, Hastings, on the 19th of January, 2008, bearing an inscription that began, "Side by side or miles apart, friends are close to the heart," serving as a poignant tribute to the young girl whose life was so tragically cut short. Her murder has also been examined repeatedly in popular culture, beginning with a 1999 episode of Channel 4's acclaimed documentary series Trial and Error, which investigated the case, but has never been repeated and remains inaccessible to the public. In May 2002, her case was briefly featured in ITV's Real Crime series, highlighting notable instances of crocodile tears in criminal proceedings. Following the conclusion of Jenkins' second retrial in 2006, he appeared in an extended interview on a special episode of Tonight with Trevor McDonald, during which he publicly addressed claims from his former wife regarding domestic abuse within the family for the first time, providing rare insight into the ongoing controversy surrounding him. On the 25th anniversary of Billy Joe's murder in 2022, Channel 5 released a 2-hour documentary titled Who Killed Billy Joe?, which revisited the case and included interviews with the officers who had led and worked on the investigation, reflecting the continued public and professional interest in the unresolved questions and enduring impact of the case. Case 2, let me explain. Lindsay Jo Reimer, born on February 17, 1981, lived with her parents, 2 sisters, and a brother in their family home on Cambridge Street in Hebden Bridge. She was in year 9 at Calder High School and was described as a popular pupil. On the evening of November 7, 1994, Lindsay was last seen alive when she left her home around 10 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time to buy a packet of cornflakes from the Spar supermarket on Crown Street. On her way, she briefly visited a local pub, the Trades Club on Holmes Street, where her mother was having a drink with a friend. Her mother invited her to stay and have a cola, but Lindsay declined and continued to the shop after asking her mother for some money to buy the cornflakes. CCTV footage captured her paying for the cornflakes at 10:22 p.m., but she never returned home that night. Since her mother was out and her father had been on the phone between 9:45 and 10:20 p.m., neither noticed her absence and assumed she had gone straight to her attic bedroom for the night. The following morning, when she failed to appear for a paper round, the news agents called her home, and her paper delivery bag was found still in the kitchen along with her school money, making it clear she had not slept in her bed and prompting immediate alarm. Police initially considered the possibility that Lindsay Reimer might have run away, and there was local speculation that she had been experiencing problems at home, although her family denied this. Her older sister, Katie, took part in a reconstruction of Lindsay's walk to the shop, and hundreds of local residents joined the police in searching the area around Hebden Bridge, but no trace of her was found. Searches also extended to parts of the Rochdale Canal and the River Calder along her route home, and the police conducted searches of the homes of every man in the town, yet Lindsay remained missing. In October 2024, when West Yorkshire Police made an appeal for information about Lindsay Reimer's disappearance on Crime Watch Live, it was revealed that one final confirmed sighting of her alive had occurred on the evening of November 7, 1994, when she was seen standing at the bottom of Crown Street by the entrance to the Memorial Garden, leaning against a wall at around 10:40 p.m., observed by 2 people who were getting off a bus at that location. Tragically, months later, on April 12, 1995, Lindsay's body was discovered by 2 canal workers in the Rochdale Canal at Rawdon Mill Lock, about 1 mile from the center of Hebden Bridge. Her body had been weighted down with a concrete boulder to prevent it from floating to the surface, though it had likely been dislodged during dredging operations in the canal in the days leading up to the discovery. She was found fully dressed in the same clothes she had worn the night she disappeared, and in her pocket was still the exact change from the cornflakes she had bought, a haunting reminder of her final moments. The arms of her jumper had been tied together in a sling, and the section of the canal where she was found was adjacent to a well-lit factory, now demolished and replaced by a storage site, leading police to believe that her killer had intimate knowledge of the area and its lack of nighttime security. Although police had previously searched parts of the Rochdale Canal, after Lindsay Reimer's body was discovered, they confirmed that the section where she was ultimately found had not been examined. Detectives admitted this had been a mistake and acknowledged that they should have focused their searches upstream, as currents in the canal could have carried her body from Hebden Bridge toward the location where it was found. However, investigators later clarified that they believed her body had been deliberately placed in that section of the canal near the factory. The large stone used to anchor her body, weighing around 20 pounds, was also determined to have come from the side of the canal itself, suggesting a calculated effort to prevent the body from resurfacing. The post-mortem on Lindsay Reimer was conducted later on April 12, 1995 at the Royal Halifax Infirmary by Home Office pathologist Mike Green, who concluded that she had most likely been strangled to death, noting that her larynx had been flattened against the spinal column and there were signs of congestion across the middle of her neck muscles. There were no indications of sexual assault, and Green determined that the attack had not been of a sexual nature. Investigators believed that Lindsay had been killed on the night of her disappearance, on November 7, 1994, and that her body had been placed in the canal hours before she was reported missing the following morning. Detectives also suspected that she had likely been killed by someone she knew, describing her as a cautious girl who would only enter the vehicle of someone she trusted. The absence of any sightings of a struggle or of her being dragged into a vehicle led investigators to conclude that she had likely entered a vehicle with a familiar person, perhaps someone she had recently met or an older sibling of a friend that a psychiatrist created an offender profile, concluding that the killer was likely someone who could drive, probably aged between 17 and the early 20s, and potentially someone Lindsay Reimer might have been attracted to. Lead investigator Tony Whittle suggested that the murder may not have been premeditated, proposing that possibly someone she knew well had offered her a lift and, unbeknownst to her, harbored a sexual attraction. He speculated that when she struggled or screamed, the situation escalated, leading to her being killed, perhaps by mistake, at the factory. The canal where Lindsay Reimer's body was found runs close to the street where her family lived, and police believe she may have walked home along an unlit path just a few yards from her house. Following her disappearance, authorities discovered that a red Honda Civic, stolen the previous night in Meanwood near Leeds, had been spotted multiple times in Hebden Bridge, near where Lindsay had last been seen, and again in the town on the evening of November 12th. Police attempted to trace both the vehicle and its driver, described as a bearded man, who aroused further suspicion after it emerged that he had tried to speak to several teenage girls in the town around the time Lindsay vanished, some of whom were her school friends. However, several weeks into the investigation, the man and vehicle were traced, and he was ruled out as a suspect due to having a confirmed alibi, being spoken to by a police officer some miles away at the time of Lindsay's disappearance. 2 months after her body was discovered, police released images of shoppers captured by CCTV at the Spar shop on the evening she disappeared, as several of the shoppers had not yet been traced, and authorities appealed for them to come forward, believing they might hold important information. About a year after Lindsay Reimer's disappearance, detectives developed a theory that she may have met her killer only days earlier at the Hebden Bridge bonfire on November 5, 1994, prompting police to appeal once again for anyone with relevant information to come forward. In the late 1990s, Lindsay's murder was reviewed as part of Operation Enigma, a nationwide cross-force police investigation set up to re-examine the unsolved murders of hundreds of women across Britain, with the aim of identifying possible links between cases and determining whether unidentified serial killers might still be at large. However, after thorough analysis, Operation Enigma ruled out any connection between Lindsay Reimer's murder and other killings, leaving her case tragically isolated and unresolved. In 2000, forensic psychologist Richard Badcock told police that the killing may have involved a sexual element, suggesting that Lindsay Reimer could have been murdered after rejecting sexual advances, and stating his belief that she was killed close to the location where her body was eventually discovered. In the years following the discovery of her body, police collected hundreds of witness statements and spoke to more than 5,000 people, while more than 1,200 vehicles were examined during the first year of the investigation alone. Detectives also investigated several known criminals who were free at the time of the murder, including John Taylor, who was later jailed for life in 2002 for the murder of Leon Tiernan, and John Oswin, who was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1998 for 2 rapes, but no evidence was found linking either man to Lindsay's murder. In April 2016, West Yorkshire Police announced that a DNA profile had been obtained by a team of forensic specialists and expressed strong interest in developing it further in the hope that it could finally identify the killer, although they did not disclose where the DNA had been recovered. On November 8, 2016, a 63-year-old man from Bradford was arrested on suspicion of murder, but was later released on police bail. And on April 25, 2017, a second suspect, age 68, was arrested in Bradford by West Yorkshire Police on suspicion of murder, as the investigation continued decades after Lindsay Reimer's death. Speaking on Channel 4 News in 2024 on the 30th anniversary of Lindsay Reimer's murder, newly appointed lead detective James Entwistle stated that there was a distinct possibility the killer was already known to investigators, and that police may have already spoken to the person responsible. During the course of the long-running investigation, that on October 13, 2025, police arrested a man on suspicion of the murder of Lindsay Reimer, with the suspect being taken into custody at a prison where he was already serving a sentence for other offenses. Over the years, several theories have been explored by investigators and commentators, including reports in 2003 that detectives were examining a possible link to double murderer Tony King and had sought access to his DNA, although police later stressed to the press that any suggestion connecting King to Lindsay's killing was purely speculative. In 2007, crime writer Wensley Clarkson published a book titled The Predator, Portrait of a Serial Killer, in which he claimed that Francisco Arce Montez, who was responsible for the highly publicized murder of 13-year-old British schoolgirl Caroline Dickinson in France, was also responsible for Lindsay Reimer's death. Clarkson alleged that Montez had been visiting York while working as a waiter at a London hotel and was on a so-called hunting trip in Yorkshire on November 7, 1994, when he believed Montez abducted and murdered Lindsay in a sexually motivated attack, claiming that his known preference was to target girls between the ages of 12 and 14. However, Lindsay Reimer's mother expressed strong skepticism about these claims, and while Clarkson stated that the information implicating Montez had come from a retired police officer, he refused to name the individual or their department and was unable to confirm whether any evidence existed placing Montez and Hebden Bridge on the day Lindsay disappeared. West Yorkshire Police responded by stating that they would seek to establish the factual basis of the claims made in the book. In 2017, retired Detective Sergeant John Matthews from Cleveland Police stated that a man he had previously questioned in connection with the murders of Tina Bell and Julie Hogg had links to Hebden Bridge and connections to the Reimer family, suggesting that this individual should have been considered a suspect in Lindsay Reimer's murder. The man, who died in 2005, had moved to Hebden Bridge in 1990 and worked at the Trades Club, a location already known to be significant in Lindsay's final movements. In popular culture, Lindsay Reimer's case has also left a lasting impact, beginning on March 20th, 1995, shortly before her body was discovered, when a documentary about the investigation aired as the first episode of Channel 4 series Deadline. The program followed journalists from Yorkshire Television's local news service calendar and featured interviews with Lindsay's parents, as well as a reconstruction of her final walk to the Spar shop, with the role of Lindsay played by her own sister. Her disappearance later inspired the 1996 play Eclipse, the first play written by Simon Armitage, which explored themes of childhood obsession with ritual, magic, and superstition elements Armitage believed reflected the character of the Hebden Bridge community. In January 2023, the Reimer case was revisited in an episode of David Wilson's Channel 4 series In the Footsteps of Killers, which primarily focused on the murder of Tina Bell, during which John Matthews was interviewed and reiterated his belief that Vince Robson, who died in 2005, was responsible for Lindsay Reimer's murder, stating that he had raised these concerns with West Yorkshire police at the time, but heard nothing further in response. In October 2024, a renewed appeal for information in the Lindsay Reimer case was broadcast on Crime Watch Live, marking the 30th anniversary of her murder, and the appeal also received widespread national attention, featuring prominently on major news outlets, including Channel 4 News and Sky News, as police once again urged the public to come forward with any information that could help bring long-awaited answers in the case. Case 3 Let Me Explain. On July 28, 1986, 25-year-old Susie Jane Lampla, formerly known as Susanna Jane Lampla, was working as an estate agent for the firm Sturgis, based at Fulham Road in West London, when she disappeared during what seemed like a routine workday appointment. That afternoon, she had arranged to show a property on Shorolds Road in Fulham to a man who introduced himself as Mr. Kipper, and her office diary carefully noted the meeting time as 12:45 in the afternoon, with the annotation indicating that the meeting was to take place outside the property. Multiple witnesses later placed Susie at number 37 Shorolds Road between 12:45 and 1 o'clock, reinforcing the timeline of her final movements. One passerby walking home saw her standing at the property's gateway around 12:50, appearing calm and expectant, as though waiting for someone to arrive. Approximately 10 minutes later, a neighbor from the adjoining house heard the sound of someone leaving the property and then saw Susie walking away from number 37 alongside an unidentified man, both of them briefly turning back to look at the house before continuing on. This brief but crucial sighting would later become the foundation for a composite image of the man last seen with her, marking the final confirmed moment before Susie Lampla vanished without a trace. The later sighting was strengthened by a third witness who was walking past the same property at roughly the same time and noticed the unidentified man carrying a bottle of champagne decorated with ribbons, a detail that stood out and later contributed to the creation of another composite image of him. Several other witnesses then reported seeing Susie Lampla and the man getting into a car, with one neighbor believing that the pair appeared to be arguing before they drove away. The man was described as a white male in his mid to late 20s, with a dark complexion and dark hair swept back, immaculately dressed in a dark charcoal suit, and giving the impression of a well-spoken, upper-class public schoolboy type, with some witnesses suggesting he may have had a broken nose. Later that afternoon, another witness claimed to have seen what looked like a couple arguing in the same area, while a separate sighting described Lampla driving erratically away from Shorolds Road, visibly arguing with the man inside the car and forcing another driver to swerve to avoid a collision. Her white Ford Fiesta was subsequently seen badly parked outside a garage on Stevenage Road, approximately a mile away, by several witnesses at different points during the afternoon, adding to the growing concern surrounding her movements. Crucially, Barbara Whitfield, a close friend of Lampla, stated that she saw Susie at around 2:45 that afternoon driving north along Fulham Palace Road with a man in the passenger seat. Whitfield waved as she cycled in the opposite direction, but Lampla did not notice her because she appeared to be engaged in conversation with the man. Because Whitfield was the only witness that day who personally knew Lampla, her account was treated as especially significant by investigators. Supporting this possibility, a woman living on Stevenage Road also reported that she may have seen Lampla with a smartly dressed man near the location, where the car had been left, reinforcing the troubling pattern of sightings that marked the final known movements of Susie Lampla on the day she vanished. Why mid-afternoon on July 28, 1986, concern began to grow at the estate agency when Susie Lampla failed to return to the office, and by around 3:30 her colleagues realized something was wrong. An hour later, they traveled to Shorolds Road to check the property she had been due to show, only to find that she was no longer there, and as the evening approached, they contacted the police to report her missing. Later that night, At around 10 o'clock, a police officer located Susie's white Ford Fiesta parked exactly where witnesses had earlier described seeing it, positioned near another house that was also on the market. The car appeared to have been left in a rush, with the driver's door unlocked, the handbrake not applied, and the ignition key missing, while the vehicle itself was poorly parked and partly overlapping a nearby garage. Inside the car, Susie's purse was discovered, but neither her personal keys nor the keys to the Shore Olds Road property were found, and investigators were troubled by the fact that the driver's seat had been pushed so far back that Susie would not have been able to reach the pedals, strongly suggesting that someone else had driven the car and abandoned it. As the investigation intensified, police began to explore the possibility that another vehicle had been involved, after witnesses reported seeing a black, left-hand drive BMW parked on Shore Olds Road earlier that day. A detail that stood out because traffic congestion and double-parked cars had made the road difficult to navigate. This account was supported by another witness who recalled a dark-colored BMW parked very close to the property where Susie had last been seen, while additional witnesses mentioned noticing two white Ford Fiestas on the same road that day. Details that deepened the mystery and added further unanswered questions to the troubling disappearance of Susie Lampla. Sometime after Susie Lampla's disappearance, a witness came forward with a sighting that would later prove significant. Initially, his account had been dismissed because he described the woman he saw as blonde-haired, while police had incorrectly assumed that Susie's hair was brown at the time of her vanishing. The witness, who was jogging near Bishop's Park, saw a car speeding south along Stevenage Road, the same road where Susie's abandoned Ford Fiesta would later be found, just as he exited the park near Fulham FC's Craven Cottage Stadium. The car, identified as a dark-colored left-hand drive BMW, suddenly stopped further down the road, and the witness saw a woman who matched Susie's description struggling inside with a man, while repeatedly sounding the horn as if trying to attract attention. Recalling the incident, the witness described, "I came out of the park to be met by a BMW, which tore across the road, and came to a halt with somebody with their hand on the hooter, pressing it for a very long time. As I stood there, I saw a blonde young lady. She looked as though she was laughing, or she could have been screaming. What worried me was how could she drive with what was going on, but it never occurred to me that it was a left-hand drive car." Adding to the growing number of concerning observations that day, another sighting reported a woman resembling Susie Lampla on the nearby Langthorne Street, reinforcing the troubling pattern of her last known movements and interactions with the unidentified man. Following Susie Lampla's disappearance, police questioned her boyfriend, a 27-year-old stockbroker, along with her male flatmate, but both men had solid alibis supported by corroborating witnesses, and no evidence linked them to the case. Her two-bedroom flat in Putney was thoroughly searched, yet nothing suspicious or out of the ordinary was found. In the days leading up to her vanishing, her office manager revealed that red roses had been mysteriously delivered to the agency by an unknown man, a detail that fueled speculation in the press, which suggested that if Mr. Kipper's first name were Dan, the combination could form the anagram kidnapper. Police initially released a photograph of Susie with dark brown hair, unaware that she had tinted it blonde on the Friday before she disappeared, creating further confusion about her appearance. The investigation itself was hampered by outdated methods. All leads were recorded manually on approximately 26,000 index cards, as the case was treated purely as a missing person inquiry, and local criminals were not initially considered as suspects. Approximately 6 months later, a potential breakthrough appeared when a man informed police that a dark-colored BMW left abandoned on a road for several months was registered to a Belgian individual known as Mr. Kipper. Detectives considered this information significant, but after tracing the car to its owner in Belgium, they confirmed that he had a solid alibi and that the vehicle had been in a Belgian garage on the day of Susie's disappearance, leading to his swift elimination as a suspect and leaving investigators back at square one. A year after Susie Lampla's disappearance, detectives began to focus on John Cannon, a convicted rapist, when it was noted that the artist's impression of Mr. Kipper bore a striking resemblance to him. Cannon had a violent history. In 1980, he had raped and assaulted his girlfriend when she attempted to leave him, and in 1981, he had raped a shopkeeper at knife point. At the time of Susie's disappearance, he had been residing in a prison hostel near Wormwood Scrubs Prison and had been on day release in the preceding months, working locally as a porter. Public school educated and known for his charm with women, Cannon had reportedly told inmates and colleagues in the weeks before Susie vanished that he was frequenting wine bars in Fulham and had met a new uptown girlfriend named Susu, a name uncannily similar to Susie. Susie herself had visited some of these wine bars, including one directly opposite her office. Cannon also frequented a pub in Putney that Susie had visited on July 25, 1986, coinciding with the day he was released from prison, just 3 days before her disappearance. He later confirmed in 2021 that he had indeed been at these establishments. Known to deliver roses to women as a romantic gesture, and having expressed interest in purchasing property in the area, Cannon's patterns and behaviors alarmed investigators. By June 1987, over a year after Susie vanished, her mother Diana publicly stated her belief that her daughter was dead, a sentiment shared by many who had followed the troubling and unresolved case. In October 1987, 15 months after Susie Lamplugh disappeared, John Cannon abducted and murdered 29-year-old Shirley Banks in Bristol, drawing immediate attention to potential links with the earlier Lamplugh case. The night before abducting Banks, Cannon had attempted to kidnap another woman and had been frequenting wine bars in Bristol, apparently searching for victims. He held Banks captive in his flat for 18 hours before murdering her and disposing of her body at a site in the Quantock Hills known as Dead Woman's Ditch. 3 weeks later, Cannon attempted to assault 2 women in a shop, arriving in his black BMW, which was later found to contain an imitation handgun, handcuffs, and a tax disc for Banks's car. Following his arrest, investigators discovered Banks's mini car hidden in Cannon's garage, fitted with a new, false number plate reading SLP 386S. Detectives noted that the letters SLP could potentially reference Susie Lampleth's initials, while 86 corresponded to the year of her disappearance, fueling speculation about a connection between the two cases. Journalists highlighted the striking resemblance between Cannon and the photo fit created for Mr. Kipper in the Lamplugh investigation, further suggesting a possible link. It was also revealed that weeks prior to murdering Banks, Cannon had joined a dating agency in Bristol under the false name John Peterson and had presented himself in a recorded video as a successful, smartly dressed businessman. This video remains publicly available and underscores the manipulative and calculated nature of his behavior. Detectives from the Metropolitan Police traveled to Bristol to question John Cannon about Susie Lampleth's disappearance. When asked about the significance of the false number plate on Shirley Banks's car, he surprisingly suggested it could be interpreted as a reference to Lamplugh, even though detectives had not mentioned her name, before claiming that he had chosen the letters at random. Cannon further asserted that he had purchased the BMW from a Bristol businessman who was allegedly responsible for the murders of Shirley Banks, Susie Lamplugh, and another woman, claiming that the man was in serious trouble. Known for assuming false identities and masquerading as a successful businessman, Cannon initially implied that he might be the man in question, but immediately recanted, ending the interview after becoming overwhelmed with emotion. In 1988, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Shirley Banks and for a series of other serious crimes, including rapes, abductions, and attempted abductions. And he was also convicted of raping a woman on a train line between London and Bristol 6 weeks after his release from Wormwood Scrubs Prison. The sentencing judge warned him that he should never again be at liberty outside prison walls. Further interviews regarding Lampleth's disappearance were conducted with Cannon in 1988, 1989, and 1990, but he was never placed on an identity parade. In 1990, a former girlfriend, Gilly Page, informed police that Cannon had spoken to her about the Lamplugh case and claimed that Susie was buried at Norton Barracks near Worcester. Another former girlfriend, Daphne Sargent, expressed her own conviction of his guilt, stating, "As soon as I heard about Susie, I knew it was John. It had all the hallmarks, right down to the champagne," reinforcing the suspicions surrounding Cannon's possible involvement in the unresolved disappearance. In the years following Susie Lampleth's disappearance, investigators continue to treat the case as a high-priority cold case, testing the DNA of over 800 unidentified bodies and skeletal remains in an effort to determine whether any matched her description. Despite these extensive efforts, no conclusive evidence was found, and 7 years after she vanished, on July 27, 1993, Lampla was officially declared dead at the request of her parents, with authorities presuming that she had been murdered. In 1988, journalist Andrew Stephen published a highly controversial book on the case, initially supported by the Lampla family before they reviewed draft versions. The book made several allegations about Lampla's private life, including claims that she had been involved in prostitution, which were widely condemned as salacious and false. Stephen faced strong accusations of victim blaming, prompting an unprecedented response from the Metropolitan Police, who publicly defended Lampla's reputation, stating that their investigations had revealed nothing more than that she was a modern young woman. A scathing review in the Times criticized Stephen for including extensive personal speculation about what he termed Lampla's quest for sexual fulfillment, suggesting that he had used these claims merely to pad the narrative. The Lampla family took legal action, ultimately forcing Stephen to add a disclaimer to the book clarifying that the family did not recognize or accept his portrayal of Susie, reaffirming their commitment to protecting her memory against misleading and damaging claims. In the mid-1990s, speculation arose that Michael Sams, who had recently been convicted of kidnapping estate agent Stephanie Slater in Birmingham and murdering Leeds prostitute Julie Dart, might have been involved in Susie Lampla's disappearance. However, police quickly discounted this theory due to a lack of supporting evidence, noting that Sam's crimes were more likely inspired by the high-profile Lampla case rather than connected to it. Additionally, by 1986, Sam's had only one leg, yet no witnesses to Lampla's final movements reported seeing a man with a limp or missing limb, further ruling him out as a suspect. In 1999, an internal Metropolitan Police report criticized the original investigation for its handling and, in particular, for failing to pursue John Cannon more aggressively. This led to a new reinvestigation in the early 2000s, with a dedicated team tasked with determining whether Cannon could be conclusively eliminated as a suspect or implicated in Lampla's presumed murder. The reinvestigation computerized the original paper index cards and uncovered evidence suggesting that several estate agents in Fulham had been visited by a man calling himself Mr. Kipper around the time of Lampla's disappearance, leading detectives to believe that Cannon had been canvassing potential victims for abduction and murder. Historical context further supported this theory. In the late 1970s and into 1980, during the final years of Cannon's troubled marriage, there had been a series of mysterious rapes targeting homes for sale in the West Midlands. The perpetrator, who specifically attacked properties listed by estate agents, became known as the house for sale rapist, aligning closely with Cannon's known patterns and reinforcing suspicions about his possible role in Lampla's fate. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, a series of assaults and rapes targeted 20 women and properties that were on the market in the West Midlands, with no perpetrator ever caught. Police later suspected that John Cannon was responsible, as the crimes began around the time his marriage was failing and abruptly ceased in early 1980 when he entered a relationship with a woman named Sharon Major. Detectives noted that these offenses displayed the same patterns that would later be seen in Cannon's crimes, and bore troubling similarities to the circumstances surrounding Susie Lampla's disappearance. In the days leading up to her vanishing, Cannon had been seen entering a house for sale on Shorolds Road without invitation, apparently under the impression that the young female occupant was alone. He behaved in a suspicious manner until the woman's husband returned, prompting him to quickly leave. Renewed attention to the case came in 2000, when BBC Crime Watch aired reconstructions that included, among them was a man who reported seeing someone resembling Cannon looking into the window of Lampla's estate agency on the day she disappeared. Lampla had been seated at a desk near that window, part of the office strategy to position an attractive woman to draw in clients. Additional witnesses emerged after police circulated Cannon's 1987 dating video, and several positively identified him as a man they had seen in Fulham on the day of Lampla's disappearance. reinforcing suspicions that he had been actively present in the area during the critical time frame. That a substantial body of circumstantial evidence emerged linking John Cannon to Susie Lampla's disappearance. Shortly before she vanished, Lampla had confided to relatives that she was seeing a new boyfriend from the Bristol area, the same region to which Cannon had recently moved and where his family originated, and expressed growing fear about him, telling a relative that she was becoming increasingly concerned for her safety. Although Cannon was serving a prison sentence in the borough of Hammersmith and Fulham at the time, he denied ever having been to Fulham. Police disproved this claim, confirming that he had worked locally as a porter while on day release. Witness reports of a dark, left-hand drive BMW parked near Lampla, in which she was seen struggling, gained further significance when investigators learned that Cannon owned a car of that exact description at the time and had previously used it to commit crimes alongside a fellow inmate. Cannon lacked a verifiable alibi for the days immediately following his release and claimed not to remember his movements during the critical period, despite having a precise memory of other events around that time. Compounding the links, prison records revealed that his nickname had been Mr. Kipper, derived from his habit of wearing Kipper-style broad ties, matching the alias used by the man who had arranged to meet Lampla on the day she disappeared. Further cementing suspicions of his involvement, in December 2000, John Cannon was arrested on suspicion of abducting and murdering Susie Lampla and was interviewed at Hammersmith Police Station. Portions of the interview were later leaked and remain publicly accessible, in which Cannon chillingly remarked that there were one or two things I haven't been caught for. Over 5 days of questioning, he offered no information that could clear him of involvement and failed to provide an alibi for his movements between the 25th and the 28th of July 1986. In September 2001, he was arrested once more and questioned at a London police station, yet again giving no evidence that could remove him from the inquiry. Investigators also focused on a mysterious phone call Lampla is believed to have made on the afternoon of her disappearance. 3 days earlier, coinciding with Cannon's release from prison, Lampla had visited the Prince of Wales pub in Putney, a venue also frequented by Cannon, where the contents of her handbag briefly went missing before being found by the landlord. The landlord phoned Lampla to inform her, and she arranged to collect the items at 6 o'clock in the evening on July 28th, the day she vanished. Hours after her disappearance, a woman identifying herself as Sarah called the pub claiming to have a message for Lampla and left a phone number, followed shortly by a man who posed as a police officer inquiring about Lampla's diary and checkbook. Police later confirmed that the man was not an officer, and the identity of Sarah remains unknown. The landlord had handed the note with the phone number to police, but it was subsequently lost, leaving this lead unresolved and adding another layer of mystery to the circumstances surrounding Susie Lampla's final hours. The first of the mysterious calls was made well before Susie Lampla's disappearance was reported, leading investigators to believe it may have been her attempting to seek help or calling under duress. The man who identified himself as a policeman during one of the calls is suspected to have been John Cannon. A chilling parallel emerged from Cannon's later crimes. When he abducted Shirley Banks in 1987, she had placed a phone call to her workplace the following morning, claiming she was unwell and would not be coming in at Cannon's insistence, believing he would release her unharmed. That call would prove to be the last communication received from Banks before she was found murdered. Detectives on the Lampla reinvestigation team also considered that Cannon might have been responsible for taking the contents of her handbag at the Prince of Wales pub, interpreting the incident as part of a clear pattern of stalking, consistent with his known behaviors and the predatory strategies he had used in previous crimes. Based on the mounting evidence linking John Cannon to Susie Lampla, police launched a focused search for her body. Investigators were particularly interested in Norton Barracks, where Cannon had allegedly told his former girlfriend Gilly Page that Lampla was buried, and which had been identified by an anonymous informant in 1999. However, the area had undergone significant redevelopment since the British Army vacated the site in 1979, and investigators were unable to conduct excavations due to residential housing now occupying the land. Detectives also explored the possibility that the false number plate Cannon had attached to Shirley Banks's car, SLP 386S, might represent an Ordnance Survey grid reference, potentially pointing to a location near Dead Woman's Ditch, where Banks's body had been discovered. Cannon was known for playing such psychological games with investigators, and it was believed that just as he had deliberately chosen the body dump site for Banks, the letters and numbers on the plate might also have been intentionally meaningful. Despite these leads and extensive searches of the area, Lampla's body was never recovered, leaving the case tragically unresolved and maintaining the enduring mystery surrounding her disappearance. In December 2000, police conducted a search of a brickworks near Norton Barracks, a site mentioned in several original witness statements, in hopes of locating Susie Lampla's remains. A year later, a second search took place in Somerset, near a river that Cannon was known to frequent, but neither search yielded any evidence of her body. By the mid-2000s, the Lampla reinvestigation team had amassed a compelling body of circumstantial evidence pointing to John Cannon. Jim Dickey, the senior investigating officer leading the reinvestigation between 2000 and 2006, summarized his theory in 2015, stating that Susie had likely been stalked by Cannon, who may have engaged with her socially or even taken her on a date. Dickey noted that Susie fit Cannon's target profile: blonde, attractive, employed as an estate agent, and from a respectable family, and that Cannon had likely observed her at her office and while viewing properties. According to Dickey, it was probable that a confrontation occurred on the day of her disappearance, during which Cannon abducted her or coerced her into entering a vehicle he controlled, after which a heated altercation ensued before he drove away with her, though her fate thereafter remained uncertain. The reinvestigation concluded that there was substantial evidence against Cannon to warrant prosecution, and the Crown Prosecution Service acknowledged the thoroughness of the police work. Nevertheless, after 4 months of deliberation, prosecutors decided there was insufficient evidence to formally charge him with Lampla's murder. In November 2002, police publicly declared Cannon as their prime suspect, stating that all other leads and potential suspects have been eliminated, and Jim Dickey affirmed that, based on the evidence available, he was as certain as possible, short of a judicial process, that Cannon was responsible for Susie Lampla's disappearance in 2007. A criminologist who had been corresponding with John Cannon revealed a crucial development from the police reinvestigations of 2000 to 2002. DNA evidence found in a car previously owned by Cannon indicated that Susie Lampla had been inside the vehicle. The criminologist also informed investigators that Cannon had access to a red Ford Sierra at the time of Lampla's disappearance, a detail previously unknown to police. Detectives located the car in a scrapyard in North London, allowing them to conduct DNA analysis. The tests confirmed that both Lampla and Cannon had been in the vehicle at some point. However, the Crown Prosecution Service determined that there was insufficient evidence to prove that they had been in the car simultaneously, preventing charges from being brought. Cannon, who had previously admitted to driving the car frequently, later denied ever using it, although the man who had lent him the vehicle confirmed that Cannon did have access to it and could have used it on the day Lampla vanished, leaving investigators with strong circumstantial evidence, but no definitive proof of his involvement at that critical moment. During an interview in 1988 regarding Susie Lampla's disappearance, John Cannon claimed that he knew a Bristol businessman responsible for the murders of Shirley Banks, Susie Lampla, and another girl, a statement investigators believe was a veiled admission of his own crimes. The third victim is thought to have been Sandra Cord, a 27-year-old office worker abducted and murdered in Bournemouth in May 1986. In November 2001, police interviewed Cannon at a York police station about Cord's murder. At the time of the crime, he had been residing in a prison hostel at Wormwood Scrubs, but was allowed weekend leave and had access to a red Ford Sierra, the same vehicle later tested in the Lampla investigation. Cord had been dropped off by a taxi driver in Throop, Dorset, near her sister's house after a night out, but her sister was not home. She was last seen walking barefoot, slightly intoxicated, around 2:45 a.m., and her body was discovered the following day in a water-filled ditch several miles away. Although Cannon denied being in Bournemouth on that day, police later proved this to be false through parking ticket records. When a Ford Sierra was recovered during the Lamplugh reinvestigations in the early 2000s, two hairs inside the car were found to match Court's DNA. Despite this link, the DNA evidence was insufficient to prosecute Cannon for her murder, leaving her death formally unsolved but strongly suspected to be connected to him. In 2008, police briefly considered whether Steve Wright, later convicted of murdering 5 women in Ipswich in late 2006, could have been linked to Susie Lamplaugh's disappearance. Both Lamplugh and Wright had worked on the ocean liner Queen Elizabeth II in 1982, with Lamplugh employed as a beautician and Wright as a steward. However, investigators quickly ruled out Wright as a suspect after reviewing his work records, which confirmed that he was on board the ship on the day Lamplugh vanished, making any involvement impossible. Investigators continued to pursue searches for Lamplaugh's remains over the following decades. In August 2010, a field off the B-4084 between Pershore and Drake's Broughton, approximately 3 miles from the former Norton Barracks, an area originally targeted in 2000, was examined alongside a limited search back at Norton Barracks itself, but no evidence was discovered. In December 2002, a former prisoner of John Cannon told police that Cannon had claimed to have buried Lamplugh beneath the patio of his mother's house in Sutton Coldfield, West Midlands. In late October 2018, police conducted an extensive search of the property, dismantling the garage, removing its concrete floor, and scouring the back garden. On November 12, 2018, authorities announced that the search had produced no evidence, leaving Lamplaugh's final resting place still unknown. In July 2019, police conducted a detailed search of land in Pershore, this time with the assistance of professional archaeologists, in another effort to locate any trace of Susie Lamplaugh's remains or evidence related to her disappearance. Despite the careful excavation and use of specialist techniques, the search produced no relevant findings, leaving investigators once again without new leads. The following month, in August 2019, the Specialist Investigation Team received information regarding a sighting of a man resembling John Cannon allegedly dumping a suitcase into the Grand Union Canal on the day Lamplugh vanished. This lead, however, was complicated by the fact that the same section of the canal had already been searched in September 2014 during an entirely unrelated inquiry, making it unclear whether the tip could yield any new evidence. The canal sighting and the continuing investigation into Lamplaugh's disappearance were later explored in 2 documentaries, The Vanishing of Susie Lamplugh and In the Footsteps of Killers, which highlighted both the persistence of the police in pursuing every possible lead and the enduring mystery surrounding her fate, emphasizing the many decades of dedicated yet ultimately inconclusive efforts to uncover the truth. John Cannon has remained the prime, and effectively the only, suspect in the disappearance of Susie Lamplugh, despite his repeated false claims that the Metropolitan Police had eliminated him from the inquiry. Throughout his incarceration, Cannon has consistently protested his innocence not only in Lamplaugh's case, but in nearly all other crimes for which he has been convicted, including offenses substantiated with DNA and fingerprint evidence. This includes the rape of a woman on a train between Reading and Bristol, a crime for which forensic analysis demonstrated that the probability of the perpetrator being anyone other than Cannon was 1 in 260 million, leaving no reasonable doubt regarding his guilt. While in prison, Cannon told a solicitor that he might eventually reveal all about Lamplaugh's fate once his mother had passed away, hinting at the location of her remains. However, in 2020, his brother disclosed that his sister had previously begged Cannon to disclose the whereabouts of Lamplaugh's body, but he had refused. According to his brother, Cannon would take his secrets to the grave because he lacks a modicum of regret, conscience, or compassion, and is fundamentally a power freak, demonstrating the controlling and remorseless nature of his personality. Criminologist Christopher Berry D., who exchanged hundreds of letters with Cannon while researching a book on him, has corroborated this assessment, asserting that Cannon would not reveal the location of Lamplaugh's remains because he is a control freak. Fellow criminologist David Wilson has echoed this view, describing Cannon as a psychopath who would not confess due to his inherent lack of empathy and manipulative need to maintain dominance over the situation. Despite decades of investigations, reinvestigations, and extensive circumstantial evidence linking him to lampless disappearance, Cannon remains uncharged in her presumed murder, and the location of her body is still unknown, leaving the case officially unsolved and a source of enduring frustration and grief for lampless family and investigators alike. John Cannon became eligible for parole in 2022, with his first hearing initially scheduled for March 2023. However, the hearing was postponed and eventually took place in October 2023, at which time his bid for release was denied, and he remained in prison. Cannon later died in Full Sutton Prison on November 6, 2024, bringing an end to any possibility of uncovering the location of Susie Lampless remains directly from him. The Susie Lampless Trust is a charitable foundation established in December 1986 by Susie's parents, Paul and Diana Lampless, following her disappearance. Its mission is to promote personal safety through training programs and various initiatives designed to help people avoid aggression, while also providing counseling and support to relatives and friends of missing persons. The Trust also operates the UK's National Stalking Helpline, offering advice and assistance to those affected by stalking. For their dedication and charitable work, Paul and Diana Lampless were honored with OBEs in 1992 and 2005, respectively. Diana Lampless passed away in August 2011 at the age of 75, and Paul Lampless died in June 2018 at the age of 87. Rachel Griffin, who had served as the Trust CEO since 2012, died of cancer in August 2019, marking the loss of another significant figure in the organization's history. Susie Lampless and her family were active members of the congregation at All Saints Church in East Sheen, located in the London Borough of Richmond-upon-Thames. In 1996, a commemorative stained glass window was installed in the church in her memory, serving as a lasting tribute to her life and as a place of reflection for family, friends, and the wider community. Her story and the enduring mystery surrounding her disappearance have also been the focus of several television documentaries, which explore the investigation, the efforts of the police, and the work of the Susie Lampless Trust, highlighting both the personal tragedy and the wider impact her case had on awareness of personal safety and the prevention of violence. Susie Lampless' disappearance has been the focus of numerous television documentaries over the decades, each exploring the investigation, the evidence against John Cannon, and the broader impact of her case. On August 16, 1989, a Crime Watch File documentary covering Cannon's conviction for the murder of Shirley Banks also examined a possible link between him and Lampless' disappearance, though Cannon unsuccessfully attempted to block the program's broadcast. On September 12, 2001, ITV aired a real crime documentary on the Lampless case, concluding that Cannon was likely responsible for her murder. The following year, Channel 5 broadcast The Man Who Killed Susie Lampless, similarly asserting Cannon's probable culpability. In 2015, Crimes That Shook Britain focused on the case, again highlighting Cannon as the likely perpetrator. December 2020 saw Channel 5 air The Vanishing of Susie Lampless, which reached the same conclusion. On March 9, 2021, Sky TV aired a two-part documentary titled The Susie Lampless Mystery / The Mystery of Susie Lampless, examining the investigation in depth and concluding that Cannon was likely responsible. On June 16, 2021, an episode of Channel 4's In the Footsteps of Killers, featuring criminologist David Wilson, focused on Lampless' disappearance, reiterating Cannon's probable involvement. Most recently, on October 2, 2021, Faking It, Tears of a Crime aired an episode called The Prime Suspect, which detailed the investigative mistakes and oversights that initially allowed Cannon to evade full scrutiny in the Lampless case. Across these programs, the consensus of investigators, criminologists, and journalists has consistently pointed to Cannon as the prime suspect in her unresolved disappearance. Case 4, let me explain. Lindsay Elizabeth Buzayak was born on November 2nd, 1983, to Jeff and Evelyn Buzayak and grew up alongside her sister Sarah in a close-knit family. By 2008, she had become a young, ambitious real estate agent in Victoria, widely recognized for her dedication, warmth, and ability to connect with clients, earning the admiration of family, friends, and colleagues alike. At that time, she was in a relationship with Jason Zalo, a member of a wealthy family involved in the real estate business, which further connected her to the industry. In late January of that year, Lindsay received an unusual phone call from a woman with a foreign accent, claiming that she and her husband were urgently seeking a home with a substantial budget. The woman used a name that was later discovered to be fabricated, which immediately put Lindsay on edge, especially since she was still relatively new in her career and had not expected clients to contact her directly in such a manner. Curious and cautious, she asked how the caller had obtained her personal cell phone number, to which the woman replied that it had been shared by one of Lindsay's previous clients. Concerned, Lindsay discussed the call with Zalo and her father, explaining her unease about the situation, but Zalo encouraged her to proceed with the meeting, highlighting the significant commission that could be earned from the potential sale. To ease her anxiety, he offered to wait outside the property during the appointment. Ultimately, Lindsay identified a suitable home and scheduled a viewing with the client for the early evening of Saturday, February 2nd, 2008, preparing herself for what seemed like a routine professional engagement while remaining mindful of the strange circumstances surrounding the inquiry. After sharing a late lunch together, Buzayak and Zalo settled their bill in the late afternoon and went their separate ways, each in their own vehicle. It is believed that Buzayak returned home briefly to change her clothes before the property viewing, while Zalo made a stop at an automobile repair shop to pick up a colleague, though he was already running behind schedule. Security footage from the shop captured him leaving with his colleague in the early evening. During this time, the couple exchanged several text messages, and Buzayak was aware that Zalo would not arrive promptly. The house she was scheduled to visit was situated at the far end of a small cul-de-sac called D. Souza Place, which contained only 4 homes and intersected with a main road, Torquay Drive, along which the side of the property and the back garden fence ran parallel. Despite being told by the caller that she would come alone, a man and a woman were present for the viewing. Around the same time as Zalo's departure from the shop, 2 witnesses observed a tall white man with dark hair accompanied by a blonde-haired woman, likely in her late 30s to mid-40s, wearing a distinctively patterned dress, walking up the quiet cul-de-sac. The witnesses saw Buzayak greet the pair with a handshake in a manner that suggested she was unfamiliar with them, and shortly thereafter, she followed them into the house, unaware of the danger that awaited inside. Zalo and his colleague arrived at the quiet cul-de-sac shortly after the scheduled viewing, and as they drove toward the property, Zalo caught a glimpse of a figure through the glass of the front door, which immediately drew his attention. He parked outside for several minutes, observing the scene, but then decided to move his car to a nearby street to avoid appearing intrusive, not wanting to come across as a nosy, interfering boyfriend. After waiting a short while, he sent a text to Buzayak to ensure that everything was proceeding normally, but there was no response as Buzayak never opened the message. When 20 minutes had passed since his initial arrival, and he had last seen the couple enter the house, Zalo approached the front door only to find it locked. Through the mottled glass, he could see Buzayak's shoes in the entrance hall, yet there was no movement, and repeated knocks went unanswered. Growing concerned, he called 911 to report the unusual situation. While he was speaking with the operator, his colleague noticed a gap in the fence of the back garden, climbed through, and saw that the back patio door was wide open. He alerted Zalo immediately, who then informed the operator that the 2 men were entering the house. Before ending the call, fully aware that something was seriously wrong inside the property, that Zalo's colleague cautiously moved through the main level of the house, making his way to the front door to unlock it and allow Zalo to enter, fully aware of the growing tension and uncertainty inside. As soon as Zalo stepped through the doorway, he rushed upstairs, driven by a sense of dread, and was confronted with the horrifying sight of Buzayak lying motionless in a pool of blood in the master bedroom. The scene immediately confirming his worst fears. Shocked and panicked, he called 911 again, summoning emergency services, who arrived shortly thereafter to take control of the situation and provide assistance, marking the tragic and violent end of what had begun as a routine property viewing. When the paramedics arrived, Buzayak was pronounced dead, having suffered multiple stab wounds, and the lack of defensive injuries suggested that she had been attacked from behind, giving her no chance to anticipate or defend herself. Nothing had been taken from her, and there were no signs of sexual assault, emphasizing the cold, deliberate nature of the crime. In the immediate aftermath, Zalo and his colleague were taken into custody for questioning, but were released without charges once their account of events was verified and the timestamp footage from the automobile repair shop confirmed that they could not have committed the murder. Over the years, Zalo has cooperated fully with investigators and successfully passed a polygraph, further supporting his innocence. With the crime scene yielding no DNA, fingerprints, or other physical evidence, police concluded that the perpetrators had carried out the murder with careful planning, likely by individuals experienced in committing violent crimes. Investigators believe the killers exited through the front door as Zalo first arrived, then fled via the back patio door and passed through the garden fence to reach a waiting vehicle on Torquay Drive, a scenario that aligns with witness accounts of a couple walking up the quiet cul-de-sac and the fact that all vehicles in the area were accounted for, leaving authorities with a chilling picture of a meticulously orchestrated and still unsolved murder. Investigators discovered that the cell phone used by the unknown woman to contact Buzayak had been purchased in Vancouver several months prior to the murder and remained unused until that single call, having been activated under the name Paulo Rodriguez, which authorities believe was fictitious. The phone was registered to a legitimate business address in Vancouver, though it is thought that the address was selected at random and had no actual connection to the crime. Shortly after the murder, the phone was deactivated and has never been used again, with cell tower data indicating that it traveled on a ferry from Vancouver the day before the attack, further supporting the theory that it had been employed solely to orchestrate the murder and then discarded, highlighting the meticulous planning behind the crime. Given the proximity of the cul-de-sac to Zalo's family connections, police also investigated his relatives, as D'Souza Court was named after developer Joe D'Souza, a friend and business associate of Jason Zalo's mother, Shirley, and part of the street was still under construction at the time, with D'Souza supervising work at the location just an hour before the murder. Despite these connections, authorities have confirmed that no member of the Zalo family is considered a suspect, and the investigation continues to focus on the unknown individuals who planned and executed the attack with chilling precision. In September 2010, the American network NBC aired an episode of Dateline titled Dream House Murder, which highlighted aspects of the investigation into Buzayak's tragic death. Saanich detectives revealed that during a visit to Calgary about 8 weeks before the murder, in December 2007, Buzayak had attempted to contact a friend of her ex-boyfriend. On January 22, 2008, that friend was arrested in what was recorded as the largest drug bust in Alberta's history, accused of playing a significant role in a drug trafficking operation. Early speculation suggested that Buzayak's murder might have been orchestrated by a drug cartel, under the assumption that she had been acting as a police informant. However, investigators quickly dismissed this theory, as she had no connection to law enforcement in that capacity, and the intimate, personal nature of the attack did not align with the methods of a hired killer. Crime scene investigator Yolanda McClary and veteran homicide detective Dwayne Stanton both agreed that while the murder was brutal, it bore the hallmarks of someone acting with a personal motive rather than as part of a contracted operation. The consensus among investigators was that Buzayak's murder was intensely personal, likely carried out by an individual with close knowledge of her life, perhaps someone who had access to inside information from the real estate office where she worked, emphasizing the careful planning and chilling intent behind the crime. Investigators also explored speculation that Buzayak's murder could be connected to another major drug bust, focusing on a man whose phone had been tapped due to his high level involvement in narcotics trafficking across British Columbia and Alberta, which had previously led law enforcement to uncover information resulting in the BC legislature raids in 2003. During this investigation, it was discovered that the phones of both Buzayak and her boyfriend had been monitored because of his association with the group, raising initial concerns about a potential link. However, this theory was swiftly dismissed, as Buzayak had no known involvement in drug use or trafficking, and her name did not appear in the defense's witness list during the related trial, reaffirming investigators' focus on the personal and premeditated nature of her murder rather than any connection to organized crime. Later in 2008, a close friend of Buzayak, Nikki, reported that she had been awakened in the middle of the night by a phone call from an unknown number. While she could not recall much of the conversation, she noticed that the female caller had a peculiar accent that she could not place, which immediately reminded her of Buzayak's earlier warning about the unidentified client who had contacted her using a strange, possibly fabricated accent, sparking fear and suspicion. In an attempt to uncover the source, Nikki called the number repeatedly until the call was finally answered by Shirley Zalo. When Nikki questioned her about the call and how she had obtained her number, Shirley explained that she had intended to reach her secretary, who shared the same name, and suggested that the presence of the wrong number in her contact list might have been due to her son, Jason, adding it. Shirley Zalo denies that this event occurred, and it remains unclear whether Nikki's claim was formally investigated by authorities. In the years following, Buzayak's father, Jeff, has commemorated his daughter each February by leading an annual walk in her memory, a vigil both to honor her life and to keep public attention focused on the unresolved circumstances of her tragic murder. In August 2017, a chilling comment appeared on a message board maintained by Jeff Buzayak, Lindsay's father, on an investigative website dedicated to the case, in which someone brazenly claimed, "I killed Lindsay and stupid cops will never prove." It sending shockwaves through the community and raising renewed concerns about the unresolved murder. In 2020, the Capital Daily requested access to public records related to the investigation and reported previously unpublished information, revealing that police had identified two phones associated with the suspects. One with a Vancouver number that had been used solely to contact Buzayak, and another that had been used to check the voicemail of the first phone. The records also disclosed unusual internet activity linked to Buzayak prior to her death, and indicated that investigators had initially considered that violent criminals among her Facebook friends might have been involved in the murder, though no definitive connection was ever established. By February 2021, Saanich police announced that advancements in DNA analysis and other forensic technology had produced new leads in the case, offering renewed hope that these modern investigative tools might finally bring clarity to the meticulously planned and still unsolved killing of Lindsay Buzayak. Case 5, Let Me Explain. Yinfei Bao had recently started working as a real estate agent at Harcourt's, bringing with her a strong background in sales. On the morning of the 19th of July, 2023, she was last seen in the suburb of Hornby in Christchurch, New Zealand, where she had planned to show a property on Trevor Street to a potential buyer. Later that morning, she made a phone call to her friend Jean Tion that lasted several minutes, during which she asked how someone she was working with could transfer a large sum of money from China to pay cash for a house. Bao was reported missing later that day after failing to pick up her daughter from after-school care, raising immediate concern among her family and friends. Her car was discovered that same evening in the suburb of Wigram. In 2 days following her disappearance, her cell phone was found abandoned on the Christchurch Southern Motorway, several kilometers away from where she had last been seen. The investigation led to the arrest of 52-year-old Ting Jun Chao at Christchurch Airport after he attempted to board a one-way international flight to China on the 22nd of July, 2023. Chao was charged with kidnapping Bao and during interrogation by Detective Sergeant Caroline Johnson. With Detective Constable Wei Zhu assisting with translation, he claimed that he had recently lost his job and had been driving around in search of employment at the time of Bao's disappearance. He stated that he had decided to leave New Zealand on the day Bao vanished, also mentioning that he did not really know her and that he had poor eyesight. On the 26th of July, 2023, the New Zealand police announced that they had launched a homicide investigation into Yinfei Bao's disappearance, signaling a serious escalation in the case. By the 31st of July, the police temporarily suspended their search due to high water levels in the Halswell River and at Lake Ellesmere, also known as Te Waihora. Up to that point, authorities had received over 200 pieces of information related to Bao's disappearance and had searched multiple properties as part of Operation Hello. Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves informed the public that police were seeking a silver Mitsubishi sedan and continued to appeal for any sightings of the vehicle. In early August, the focus of the search shifted to roads and farmland near the Green Park suburb of Christchurch, with further items of interest recovered the following day. By early September, police expanded their search to several new areas in Christchurch and Ralston, while continuing to concentrate efforts on the Housewell River and Green Park regions through October, requesting public assistance in locating clothing and a roughly 1 meter long flat-bottomed spade connected to the investigation. On the 19th of January, 2024, Reeves emphasized that the search for Bao remained ongoing, specifying interest in a silver Mitsubishi 380 with registration DPH 101 and seeking sightings across the wider Christchurch area beyond Lake Ellesmere. About a full year after Bao's disappearance, on the 19th of July, 2024, Reeves confirmed that the investigation remained very active, with police finalizing evidence ahead of the trial and reaffirming their commitment to recovering Bao's remains to provide closure for her family. By this time, the investigative team had been reduced to 8 officers, yet a new lead had prompted renewed searches in both previously examined areas and a newly identified location, including Christchurch's Green Park neighborhood, where searches conducted 3 weeks prior had yielded no relevant findings. On the 30th of July, 2024, police announced that human remains, believed to be those of Yinfei Bao, had been discovered at a rural property in Green Park, a neighborhood in Lincoln. The remains were located in a shallow grave, only 15 centimeters deep, along the tree line of the property. More than 60 police officers were involved in the search, which took approximately 90 minutes to uncover the grave. Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves stated that new information had recently come to light, giving them a very specific lead on where to search, which ultimately led to the discovery. Jason Wills, Chief Executive Operations Manager at Harcourt's Gold, offered his condolences on behalf of the company, acknowledging the tragedy. A post-mortem autopsy was conducted the following day, the 31st of July, and on the 2nd of August, 2024, police officially confirmed that the remains found on the Green Park property were indeed those of Yinfei Bao. During the announcement, Detective Inspector Reeves remarked that this development brought a key aspect of the investigation to a close and that Yinfei would now be returned to her family, while authorities confirmed that a thorough scene examination had taken place at the property to support ongoing investigative efforts. On the 15th of August, 2023, police formally charged the man accused of kidnapping Yinfei Bao with a single murder charge, while also seeking public information regarding a tracksuit, a top, and a spade connected to the case. On the same day, the accused entered a plea of not guilty to the murder charge through his lawyer and was remanded into custody until the 1st of September. On that date, the suspect was officially identified as Tingjun Chow, and his lawyer no longer sought interim name suppression. Chow appeared before the Christchurch High Court via audiovisual link and was remanded in custody, later reappearing in court by video link on the 10th of November while his lawyer requested additional time for preparation. Police custody was continued until his next scheduled court appearance in December of 2023. A tentative trial date was initially set for the 24th of October, 2024, though the trial ultimately began slightly earlier on the 21st of October, with Chow opting to face a jury trial. On the 23rd of August, 2024, now 53-year-old Tingjun Chow appeared via video link before Justice Rob Osborne at the Christchurch High Court, with his lawyer, Joshua McLeod, stating publicly, "From our perspective, everything is still on track," signaling the ongoing progression of the legal proceedings, and on the 21st of October, 2024, slightly ahead of schedule, the murder trial of Yinfei Bao commenced with the selection of a jury consisting of 6 men and 6 women. The trial, set to last 6 weeks, took place at the Christchurch High Court under the supervision of Justice Lisa Preston. During the proceedings, the court heard testimony from more than 80 witnesses, including Bao's husband, Paul Gooch, her family and friends, as well as police officers, forensic experts, and medical professionals. Because the defendant, Tingjun Chow, spoke only Chinese, the court relied on a translator to interpret proceedings between English and Chinese. The Crown was represented by prosecutors Cameron Stewart and Pip Curry, while Chow was initially defended by lawyers Colin Eason and Joshua McLeod. However, during the third week of the trial, Chow dismissed his legal team and chose to represent himself, with Justice Preston appointing Eason and McLeod as standby counsel to provide support as needed throughout the trial. On the first day of the trial, Ting-Jun Chow pleaded not guilty to the murder charge through an interpreter. Prosecutor Cameron Stewart delivered the Crown's opening address, asserting that Chow had stabbed Yinfei Bao inside a property on Trevor Street that he had intended to purchase, before placing her body into a car and concealing it on farmland. Stewart suggested there may have been a sexual motive behind the killing, citing a deleted photo discovered on Chow's phone as part of the evidence. He explained that forensic analysis confirmed Bao's blood was found inside the property and that police had used CCTV footage, phone polling, and geolocation data to track Chow's movements in the aftermath of her disappearance. Stewart further detailed that in May of 2024, investigators had successfully unlocked Bao's cell phone, which provided crucial data that not only helped locate her remains, but also enabled authorities to reconstruct Chow's movements during the investigation. In contrast, defense lawyer Joshua McLeod presented Chow's opening statement, emphasizing that his client denied killing Bao and arguing that the evidence did not conclusively support a guilty verdict. But McLeod contended that the evidence was much muddier than the Crown would lead you to believe, urging the jury to remain objective and cautioning against allowing emotions to influence their judgment, while also questioning the thoroughness and scope of the police investigation. During the trial, the Crown presented a series of witnesses to build its case against Ting-Jun Chow, including Detective Constable Andrew Calder, Bao's partner Paul Gooch, builder Mervyn Bachlot, several of Bao's colleagues, friends, and relatives, the owner of Home and Castle Hardware and Stuff Hardware Store, Dennis Shrimpton, and Chow's former employer, Chunchi Jasami. The prosecution submitted footage showing Bao entering the hardware store in New Brighton on the day of her murder, purchasing a spade, which became a key piece of evidence. Detective Inspector Joel Syme testified that police had been able to track Bao's cell phone movements via cell towers around Housewell Village and Tai Tapu, helping to reconstruct her movements before her death. Other Crown witnesses included Senior Constable Dean Stevenson, police digital forensic analyst Joshua Locke, who analyzed Bao's phone messages, Detective Constables Andrew Calder and Grace Schurgers, Constable Duncan Fosbender, and Detective Leon Benjamin. ESR forensic scientist Winnie Janes provided testimony on forensic evidence discovered at the Hornby property that Bao had visited prior to her death, while additional testimony from Constables Abigail Howe, Clayton Davison, and Detective Jeff Reed detailed Bao's car and the injuries she sustained. The court also heard a 6-hour police interview of Chow following his arrest on the 22nd of July, 2023. Throughout the proceedings, Justice Lisa Preston repeatedly cautioned Chow for asking witnesses irrelevant questions, repeating previous questions, or questioning matters beyond the witness's expertise, ensuring the trial remained focused on the evidence presented. On the 29th of November, Ting-Jun Chow testified in his own defense, admitting that he had gone to the Trevor Street property on the day Yinfei Bao disappeared, but insisting that she was not inside when he arrived. Chow claimed that while walking back to his car, he encountered a stranger named Mr. Tang, who requested to test drive his vehicle, and that he had even lent Mr. Tang his shoes while his phone remained in the car. On the 2nd of December, Chow continued his testimony, asserting that Mr. Tang had communicated with him via a walkie-talkie because he had Chow's phone, though he did not accuse Mr. Tang of murdering Bao. He maintained that forensic analysis of his shoes, which revealed DNA from multiple people, supported Mr. Tang's existence. During cross-examination, prosecutor Pip Curry challenged Chow's account as completely fictitious and made up, referencing his earlier police interview in which he confirmed he was the only person using the car during Bao's disappearance and emphasizing that Chow had admitted ownership of a cell phone. Curry further argued that the defendant had lured Bao to the Trevor Street property under false pretenses, directly contradicting Chow's version of events. In response, Chow accused the police of planting evidence against him and alleged that he had been mistreated and denied sleep following his arrest, presenting his defense as a mixture of alternative explanations and claims of procedural misconduct. On the 3rd of December, prosecutor Pip Curry delivered the Crown's closing address, arguing that Ting-Jun Chow had deliberately lured Yinfei Bao to the Trevor Street property under the pretext of viewing and possibly purchasing it. Curry stated that Chow had then attacked Bao before placing her into the boot of his car and transporting her to McCartney's Road, where he murdered her. She explained that after purchasing a spade from a hardware store in New Brighton, Chow had buried Bao's remains in a shallow grave on a farm in the Green Park area. Curry emphasized that the Crown's case was supported by an overwhelming body of evidence, including video footage, social media activity, eyewitness testimony, forensic analysis, and cell phone data, painting a consistent and compelling picture of Chow's actions and intent. On the 4th of December, Justice Lisa Preston addressed the jury, outlining the Crown's case and reminding them that the burden of proof rested entirely with the prosecution, while also cautioning them not to draw any conclusions from Ting-Jun Chow's earlier courtroom behavior. She summarized Chow's defense, which claimed that the police had falsified evidence against him and that another man named Tang had allegedly murdered Yinfei Bao, taken a graphic photograph of her using Chow's phone, and used his car to dispose of her remains. After retiring to deliberate, the jury returned a verdict after an hour and a half, finding Chow guilty of murdering Bao. Bao's partner, Paul Gooch, welcomed the decision, criticizing Chow for his lack of remorse and humanity during the trial, while also thanking the New Zealand police for their work in bringing Chow to justice and acknowledging his stepdaughter's school for supporting her through the incredibly traumatic experience. Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves also expressed empathy for Bao's family and welcomed the resolution of the murder case. Chow was subsequently remanded in custody, with sentencing scheduled for the 7th of March, 2025. On the 13th of June, 2025, Ting-Jun Chow's sentencing hearing took place at the Christchurch High Court with Judge Lisa Preston presiding. During the proceedings, Chow was removed from the courtroom and placed in another room via video link after repeatedly disrupting the hearing. Although Chow had dismissed his lawyers, Colin Eason remained present to represent him, explaining that Chow had not understood it was a sentencing hearing and wished to appeal his conviction. Chow maintained his innocence, continuing to assert that the fictional Mr. Tang had been responsible for murdering Yinfei Bao. The court heard emotional victim impact statements from Bao's 11-year-old daughter, her husband Paul Gooch, her father-in-law David Gooch, and Bao's 74-year-old father, who spoke via video link from China. Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves paid tribute to Bao and her family, acknowledging the profound loss they had endured. Crown Prosecutor Cameron Stewart requested a maximum sentence of life imprisonment with an 18-year minimum term, citing the brutal nature of the crime and Chow's callous behavior following the murder. Eason asked Judge Preston to consider mitigating factors, including Chow's profound isolation in prison due to language barriers and separation from his wife and teenage sons, requesting a minimum term of 17 years. Judge Preston condemned Chow for sexually violating Bao during the assault and for his complete lack of remorse, ultimately imposing a life sentence with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years and 5 months, reflecting the severity and calculated cruelty of his actions. By the 31st of July, 2023, a Give You a Little fundraising page was established by Bao's friend Vonna Liu to support her immediate family and relatives in China, ultimately raising over 50,000 New Zealand dollars by the time the campaign concluded in August. More than a year later, on the 18th of November, 2024, a public memorial service for Yinfei Bao was held at Our Lady of Victory's Church in Sockburn, where her partner Paul Gooch, her father, and her sister delivered heartfelt eulogies, honoring her memory and allowing family, friends, and the wider community to pay tribute to her life while coming together to mourn the tragic loss. Case 6 Let Me Explain. Melanie Hall, described by her parents as a young, vibrant daughter, had recently graduated from the University of Bath in 1995 with a degree in sociology and psychology. a milestone her mother, Pat Hall, said had been a cherished dream for Melanie over 4 years. She worked as a clerical officer at Bath's Royal United Hospital, while her father, Stephen Hall, was actively involved in the community, serving as chairman of Bath City Football Club. On the 8th of June, 1996, Melanie had arranged to stay with her boyfriend, Philip Carlbaum, and her mother drove her to his home that evening. That night, Melanie went out to Cadillac's nightclub in Bath with Carlbaum and another couple. During the evening, she reportedly had an argument with Carlbaum, who left the club visibly upset after allegedly seeing her dancing with another man. Melanie was last seen sitting on a stool at the club at approximately 1:10 in the morning on the 9th of June, 1996, and when she failed to report for work 2 days later, on the 11th of June, her parents reported her missing, marking the beginning of a mysterious and tragic disappearance. On the 17th of June, 1996, Philip Carlbaum expressed his profound devastation at Melanie Hall's disappearance, as family and friends struggled to come to terms with her sudden vanishing. Avon and Somerset police launched extensive searches along the River Avon and conducted interviews with thousands of nightclub patrons and taxi drivers, desperately following every lead. A reward of £10,000 was offered for information, while the BBC programs Crime Watch and Crime Stoppers, along with Melanie's sister Dominique, made public appeals in hopes of uncovering any trace of her. Despite these efforts, no definitive evidence was ever found. A Crime Watch appeal broadcast on the 5th of November, 1996, highlighted several unconfirmed sightings from around the time of her disappearance. One witness reported seeing a woman resembling Melanie at Cadillac's nightclub speaking to a man before leaving with him. Around 2 in the morning on the 9th of June, 2 women leaving Domino's Pizza on Walcott Street claimed to see a woman who looked like Melanie arguing with a man outside the church hall, and shortly thereafter, further along Walcott Street, another witness recalled seeing a man coaxing a woman, possibly Melanie, into the Podium car park. After years of uncertainty and ongoing investigation, Melanie Hall was eventually declared legally dead on the 17th of November, 2004, leaving a long shadow of grief and unanswered questions over her mysterious disappearance. On the 5th of October, 2009, a motorway worker making routine maintenance along the slip road at Junction 14 of the M5 motorway discovered a plastic bin bag containing human bones while clearing vegetation. The bag held a skull, pelvis, and thigh bone, and further remains were later found buried and scattered across the field beside the motorway. Police confirmed the remains were human, and when they showed a piece of jewelry recovered at the site to Melanie Hall's parents, they immediately recognized it as belonging to their daughter, though authorities refrained from officially confirming the identity until a postmortem could be conducted. On the 7th of October, 2009, the remains were formally identified as Melanie Hall's through dental records. The postmortem revealed that she had suffered severe blunt force trauma to the head, including a fractured skull, cheekbone, and jaw. Investigators also noted that blue rope had been used to tie the bin bags around her body, a chilling detail that underscored the brutality of the crime and deepened the tragedy surrounding her disappearance nearly 14 years earlier. Following the discovery of Melanie Hall's remains, her parents launched a renewed appeal on the 8th of October, urging anyone with information to come forward as investigators continued to seek justice for their daughter. Avon and Somerset CD Detective Sergeant Mike Britton, who had spent 13 years working on the case, stated that he would remain active on the investigation, codenamed Operation Denmark, even after his official retirement, highlighting the dedication of the team to solving the long-standing mystery. On the 29th of October, 2009, police announced that 3 keys to a Ford vehicle, possibly a Transit, Fiesta, or Escort, had been recovered near the site of Hall's remains, and authorities were collaborating with Ford to identify the vehicle and follow up any leads. A new appeal from Crime Watch resulted in more than 200 phone calls from the public, prompting police to increase the reward for information, leading to an arrest to £20,000. Years later, in October of 2019, Investigators revealed they had successfully obtained a partial DNA profile from the rope used to bind the bag containing Hall's remains and reaffirmed their confidence that the person responsible would ultimately be brought to justice. Hall's parents also reinstated a £50,000 reward for information that could lead to an arrest and conviction, demonstrating their unwavering commitment to seeking answers for the tragic loss of their daughter. In 1998, police questioned John Cannon, the suspected killer of Susie Lampla, in connection with Melanie Hall's disappearance, due to his known links to the Bristol area and reports that he had allegedly plotted her murder from his prison cell at HM Prison Durham. Investigators explored claims from sources who said Cannon had spent hours meticulously planning what he called the perfect abduction with a fellow inmate, a convicted rapist who was purportedly prepared to carry out the plan upon release. Strangely, despite Cannon being incarcerated at the time Melanie was last seen alive, several witnesses came forward insisting they had seen him abducting her that night. Hall's parents expressed their fear that, if Cannon were responsible, they might never know the truth, given his notorious tendency to withhold information about victims to maintain control over investigations. Over the years, multiple other leads were investigated. In 2003, police arrested 2 men, but released them without charge following searches of buildings and a field near Bath. In 2009, a 37-year-old man confessed to involvement in Hall's murder in Greater Manchester, but was eliminated as a suspect after psychiatric evaluation. In July 2010, a 38-year-old man from Bath was arrested on suspicion of murder and later released on bail. And in August of the same year, a 39-year-old man from Wiltshire handed himself into police in the Avon and Somerset area on suspicion of murder, only to be released on bail. Despite these multiple lines of inquiry, the mystery surrounding Melanie Hall's abduction and death remained unsolved, leaving investigators and her family grappling with a long history of false leads and unanswered questions. In October of 2013, police reported discovering a white Volkswagen Golf believed to be connected to their ongoing inquiries into Melanie Hall's disappearance and murder, alongside receiving crucial information regarding the rope used to bind her remains. On the 25th of November that year, a 44-year-old man was arrested at an address in Bath on suspicion of murder. He was subsequently released on bail until the 19th of December, during which time authorities conducted a thorough search of a property at Roundhill Park, Whiteway. By the 28th of November 2014, police confirmed that there was insufficient evidence to charge the suspect. Years later, on the 23rd of June 2016, a 45-year-old man was arrested following the retrieval of DNA from the location where Hall's remains had been discovered, but he was released on bail just a few days later. Over the course of the investigation, which spanned decades, 11 arrests have been made by October of 2019, yet despite the sustained efforts, no one has ever been charged, leaving the case unresolved and Hall's family and investigators still searching for answers in the enduring mystery surrounding her tragic death. Investigators have also explored potential connections between Melanie Hall's disappearance and other high-profile cases, though no definitive links have been established. Police have not ruled out suggested ties to John Cannon, the suspected killer of estate agent Susie Lampla, who vanished in July 1986 and whose body has never been recovered. Authorities have also considered possible connections to a serial sex attacker in Bath, nicknamed the Batman Rapist, after leaving a baseball cap with a Batman logo at the scene of one attack. This unknown assailant was known to have attempted a carjacking at knife point in the same area just hours before Hall was abducted, leaving the intended victim wounded but alive. Other leads have suggested a potential link to Levi Belfield, who is serving a life sentence with a whole life order for the murders of Millie Dowler, Marcia McDonnell, and Amelie Delagrange committed between 2002 and 2004. A connection to Christopher Hallowell, convicted and serving a life sentence with a whole life order for the murders of Sion O'Callaghan and Becky Godden-Edwards, has been formally ruled out by Avon and Somerset police. Despite decades of investigation and the exploration of numerous links to other offenders, Melanie Hall's abduction and murder remain shrouded in mystery, with her family and investigators still hoping that one day the person responsible will be brought to justice. Case 7, let me explain Debbie, and Lindsley was born in Bromley, Kent, on the 20th of October, 1961, to Arthur and Marguerite Lindsley. Her father had retired as an insurance broker, while her mother worked investigating fraud for the Department of Social Security, instilling in Debbie a sense of diligence and responsibility from a young age. By 1988, Debbie had moved out of her family home and was living in Edinburgh, where she had established herself as a hotel manager, building a professional life independent of her family. She had recently returned to London to attend a hotel management course, staying with her parents in Bromley, and also took the opportunity to visit her brother Gordon, whose wedding she was due to attend as a bridesmaid in just 2 weeks. On the afternoon of Wednesday, the 23rd of March, Gordon kindly gave Debbie a lift to Petswood Station, from where she boarded the Orpington to London train at 16 minutes past 2. The train made several intermediate stops, including Bickley, Bromley South, Shortlands, Beckenham Junction, Kent House, Penge East, Sydenham Hill, West Dulwich, Herne Hill, and Brixton, before it was scheduled to arrive at London Victoria at 50 minutes past 2, carrying Debbie toward the next chapter of her day. Debbie boarded a 4 EPB electric multiple unit, number 5115, a train composed of a mixture of carriage types designed to accommodate different passenger preferences. Some carriages were fully open with a central gangway running the full length, allowing passengers to move freely between sections, while others consisted of unconnected, full-width compartments seating 12 people each, with doors on either side opening directly to the platform and no internal access to neighboring compartments. Debbie chose the trailer second carriage, number 15084, one of these compartment-style carriages, which may have appealed to her because it was one of the few in which smoking was permitted, offering a small degree of privacy and comfort. Following the tragic events that unfolded on this train, British Rail highlighted the importance of maintaining at least some corridor-type carriages on their services, ensuring passengers always had a choice between open gangway carriages and isolated compartments, a design meant to balance convenience, accessibility, and safety at some point during the journey. Tragedy struck when Debbie Lindsley was brutally stabbed to death in her compartment, sustaining 11 deep wounds to her face, neck, and abdomen, including at least 5 aimed at the area around her heart, one of which proved fatal. When the train reached Platform 2 at London Victoria at 50 minutes past 2, a British rail porter, performing the customary check, was confronted with a harrowing scene. The floor and seat of the carriage were soaked in blood. Some of this blood was later identified as belonging not only to Debbie, but also to her attacker, who had sustained injuries during a struggle. Debbie had defense wounds on her hands, suggesting she had attempted to protect herself, and a Scotland Yard spokesman indicated that she may have been resisting a sexual attack, though investigators found no evidence of sexual interference. The compartment, once a place of relative privacy and routine travel, had been transformed into a scene of shocking violence, leaving an indelible mark on all who would later hear the crime and underscoring the terrifying vulnerability of passengers in isolated train compartments. Debbie Lindsley's funeral was held at Holy Trinity Church in Bromley on the 22nd of April, followed by her burial in a nearby cemetery, where the cortege was solemnly escorted by police from the church to the gravesite. In a poignant tribute, Debbie was laid to rest in the bridesmaid's dress she had planned to wear at her brother Gordon's wedding, a final nod to the life and celebrations she had been preparing to share with her family. In response to the horrifying circumstances of her death, British Rail accelerated the phase-out of compartment-style carriages like the one in which Debbie had been murdered, and within a week announced that these carriages would be reduced on off-peak services to minimize the risk of passengers being isolated. In addition, a broad red band was painted along the contrail of remaining non-corridor coaches, providing passengers with a visible way to identify them before boarding and highlighting the safety changes prompted by the tragic attack on Lindsley, a brutal incident that would forever change how passengers perceive the relative privacy of train compartments. The Metropolitan Police's senior investigating officer, Superintendent Guy Mills, described Debbie Lindsley's murder as savage and brutal, emphasizing the terrifying circumstances of the attack. Because the compartment she had been traveling in lacked any internal corridor, She had no means of escape except through the side doors onto the track, a nearly impossible route in the brief span of the journey. Mills noted the extreme ferocity of the assault, suggesting that it was unlikely to have been the first violent act committed by her attacker, and highlighting the calculated and vicious nature of the crime. Furthermore, the short duration of the Brixton to Victoria journey, lasting only 6 minutes, led investigators to consider the possibility that Debbie may have known her assailant, raising chilling questions about premeditation and familiarity within such a confined, isolated space. The combination of proximity, opportunity, and extreme violence painted a stark picture of the vulnerability passengers faced in compartment-style carriages and underscored the urgency and complexity of the police investigation. Although roughly 70 passengers had boarded and departed the train by the time it arrived at Victoria, the only potential witness to the attack appeared to be a French au pair, who reported hearing loud, piercing screams shortly after the train left Brixton, capturing the terror of the brief journey. Of particular interest to police were several individuals whose movements seemed suspicious. A short, stocky man was reportedly seen jumping from the train at Victoria. A man was observed leaving a compartment at Penge East before reboarding, possibly entering Lindsley's coach, and a scruffy man with dirty blonde hair alighted from the train at Penge East, prompting authorities to release an artist's impression to the public. Another man had been seen staring at women as they boarded the train at Orpington. The murder weapon itself was never recovered, though investigators believed it to have been a heavy-bladed knife between 5 and 7.5 inches in length. The original 1988 police investigation was exhaustive, producing 1,200 witness statements and questioning 650 individuals, all of whom were ultimately ruled out as suspects. The case drew national attention and was later featured on the crime reconstruction program Crime Watch UK on the 14th of April, 1988, as authorities sought public assistance in piecing together the final moments of Debbie Lindsley's life and the identity of the person responsible for such a brutal and calculated attack. An inquest into Debbie Lindsley's death was held on the 16th of November, 1988, during which the French au pair who had heard the attack came under criticism from the coroner for failing to pull the communication cord, despite her belief that someone was being raped. She explained that she had been glued to her seat, in shock, and only contacted police after discovering that a murder had occurred. The coroner emphasized that, although other passengers reported hearing a commotion, no one had taken steps to investigate or intervene, underscoring a tragic combination of fear, shock, and missed opportunity. The inquest ultimately returned a verdict of unlawful killing. In the wake of Lindsley's murder, British Rail's Eastern region implemented new safety measures, ordering train guards to proactively patrol their services and remain especially vigilant for women traveling alone. Police also advised passengers to exercise caution on the railways, emphasizing that carriages where the only means of escape was directly onto the line or platform posed particular risk, and highlighting the urgent need for awareness and vigilance to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Years after Debbie Lindsley's murder, the case was reopened thanks to advances in DNA technology. Investigators had preserved blood left at the scene by her killer, but in 1988, DNA science was still in its infancy and could not yield a definitive lead. By 2002, however, forensic techniques had advanced sufficiently to allow the creation of a complete DNA profile from the preserved sample, breathing new life into the investigation. The renewed focus on Lindsley's case was highlighted on the national television program Tonight with Trevor McDonald, which aired on the 13th of September, 2002, bringing public attention back to the cold case. Responsibility for the investigation was handed to the Metropolitan Police's Cold Case Section, established in 2000, and a comprehensive publicity campaign was launched at London Victoria Station, including a peak-time television reconstruction of the crime scene, designed to jog memories, generate new leads, and finally bring the person responsible for Debbie Lindsley's brutal murder to justice. WY 2013, the lead officer on Debbie Lindsley's case described it as puzzling that the killer's DNA, belonging to a probable repeat violent offender, had still not matched anyone in the national database. leaving the case frustratingly unresolved decades after the murder. In an effort to generate new leads, police offered a £20,000 reward for information that could lead to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator, while the cold case team meticulously re-examined every step of the original investigation, including tracking down Lindsley's 70 fellow passengers from that fateful train journey, identifying at least 50 of them for further inquiry. Over the years, Deborah's parents had made repeated public appeals for help in solving the case, though her mother had sadly passed away by 2013, leaving only Arthur to continue the fight for justice. Detectives later suggested that the killer, who had been injured and likely bloody during the attack, may have behaved differently after the murder, exhibiting changes in demeanor that friends, family, or colleagues might have noticed at the time, adding another layer of chilling detail to an already confounding investigation that remained unresolved yet meticulously pursued decades later.